For everyone with an interest in NASH or more broadly, fatty liver disease, Surf's Up, Season 3, Episode 21, our newsmaking, groundbreaking conversations with Donna Cryer and Naim Alkhouri starts now.
This week on Surfing the NASH Tsunami.
So Donna, not to tee this up, but you said you actually had news for us.
I do. I am very excited to announce a new white paper.
It's been a good couple of weeks. We had 2 papers published that I wanted to highlight.
Oh, you're going to make me make a 4th announcement, and that breaks my little beautiful trinity of things.
Speaking of lifestyle, so I'm very excited to share that we've been working with Noom, the weight loss app.
When Naim was talking about using the 248 cutoff, that's not dissimilar to what I see when people walk in for lifestyle. But also, using that 248 means they've got targets. They do feel better when they get to that level, but it's also about the cardiovascular risk, the hypertension, all of the other risks that we're going long term.
So this is how I look at it. If my recommendation is going to be lifestyle, I'm going to be very aggressive and use the low cutoff. If I'm thinking about studying medicine, probably I'm going to do the FibroScan, follow it with another non-invasive test, make sure that I'm treating real disease, and then get them on pharmacologic treatment.
The low cutoff will motivate better behavior. The high cutoff is what drives you to Medicaid or not.
For people who live with obesity, if you can change your liver health losing 1 kilo, you don't feel like you're on that treadmill and that real difficult thing, I've still got 9 kilos to lose. Actually, you've improved your liver health, which will improve other health on that change. If you continue that change, your weight drops consistently.
As much as my heart is in hepatology, I still love to be connected to this tech space, the digital health space, the AI space. I think it's important to the future of health and all of us.
You just said something that really struck me funny, which is that as much as your heart is with liver, it's also with digital health. Let me suggest that liver needs digital health more than just about any other organ in the body does.
Every week, a global community of fatty liver disease stakeholders comes together to explore the most important challenges in diagnosing, treating, and developing medications for patients with fatty liver diseases. Join liver wellness advocate Louise Campbell, pricing and forecasting guru Roger Green, and this week's guests, Global Liver Institute founder and CEO Donna Cryer, and hepatology researcher and key opinion leader Dr. Naim Alkhouri, as they discuss their recent publications and newsmaking events this week on Surfing the NASH Tsunami.
Для всіх, хто цікавиться мережею NASH або загалом жировою хворобою печінки, ловіть хвилю.
And now, our interview with Naim Alkhouri.
So, welcome back. First, I want to thank Anna Tokar, as I do every week, for leading into our program with our tagline in Ukrainian. It is my hope that the next time we do personal interviews, we will have someone, maybe Anna, someone from Ukraine on to talk about the situation there and really how it affects their health system and the health of people in Ukraine whose lives have been so changed and decimated by this war. Second, this is a different episode for a bunch of reasons. I talked about some of these last night in the special episode with Jorn. We have 11 opening quotes this morning. We rarely have more than 5. The reason is because Naim and Donna, to my delight, both brought news with them when they came to the podcast. In fact, Donna brought 3 pieces of news. We forced her into a 4th. And Naim was just a fount of news all the way through our episode. Not just news. These are great conversations. You're talking about 2 people with tremendous insight and real passion for fatty liver disease, and I think that comes through the conversation as well. So, first we will listen to Naim, since we did his interview earlier, then we did Donna's, and then we'll listen to Donna. Enjoy. Have a great time with all this, and I look forward to getting feedback from you guys when we're done about whether you like this interview format and whether we should make it a semi-regular part of what we do, like maybe every other month with just good friends and interesting people. Thanks. Have fun. We're back, and Louise has joined us because it's only 5:30 in the morning in Australia, so she figured she could get up early, and we have Naim with us. Naim Alkhouri. Naim, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Doing fine, thanks. And Louise, how are you at 5:30 in the morning?
Just about with you, but I'm getting there.
You look fresher than you did at 3 in the morning the other day.
Go figure.
Yeah, really. we haven't committed Louise to have to come to any of these. She's only coming to the ones that either fit her schedule or more to the point she wants to join. So Naim, feel honored.
I am very, very honored. Thank you for joining us, Louise.
And of course, your kind words on last week's episode didn't hurt either. That was the one at 3:30 in the morning where you said, that's why I love being on podcast with you. That was good. That was good. I know it worked well. We're not doing formal icebreakers, but you did mention what you're doing last weekend, if you want to talk about that for a sec.
Well, I just came back from Disneyland with my kids, and they loved it. This is their first time to Disneyland in LA, and they gave it a 10 out of 10 rating. I took them to the Grand Canyon the weekend before, and that was 8 out of 10. So I think I outdid myself with Disney.
So why did the Grand Canyon only get 8?
Well, they're 7 and 9, so you can see clearly why Disney will win over the Grand Canyon. I think when they're teenagers, probably they'll like the Grand Canyon more.
Did you drive to the Grand Canyon?
Yeah, and we even drove to LA also. It's only 5 hours from Phoenix, not too bad.
Okay, the kids can handle long drives then. I was thinking that's the other hypothesis.
I'm impressed the Grand Canyon got 8, to be fair, at that age.
No, they liked it. It was interesting.
And Dad knows lots of interesting things, and he's very entertaining. So I'm sure you had something to do with that.
Yeah, I turn into one of the kids. I eat whatever they're eating. We do ice cream, and I'm always feeling guilty, but it's just so hard. You walk through downtown Disney and you see all these amazing places, and you snack on this and that, and you're like, what am I doing here? But that's life.
Well, as I think my wife works for Noom, and the way that Noom would look at this, we'll get to Noom in a minute, from a whole different perspective. The way Noom would look at this is, it's one day, right? So tomorrow, just do the right thing. And
yeah, it was more like a weekend, but today I'm fast.
So for 3 days, do the right thing. How's that?
Yeah.
So we haven't checked in with you in a while. You were on last week, but just in terms of the things that you're doing that are interesting. So this week we wanted to take the time, check in with some of our favorite people. What have you been up to?
Well, it's been a good couple of weeks. We had 2 papers published that I wanted to highlight. The first one is an analysis from a trial called the Edict Trial. This was done with the diabetes group in San Antonio. This is a group led by Dr. Ralph DiFronzo, who's a world-renowned expert in type 2 diabetes. So in this trial, patients were randomized to combination therapy with pioglitazone, exenatide, so GLP-1 agonist, and metformin versus standard diabetes care, which, you start with metformin and do sulfonylureas and add insulin. So these were like patients newly diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, not previously on treatment. They were followed for 6 years. The trial started before my time, but when I came in, we wanted to look at liver outcomes. So we were able to do FibroScans at the end of the trial, and we had also ALT, AST values and some of the indices that we calculate, like APRI, NAFLD fibrosis score. And, the take-home message was that when we looked at the combination therapy, again, pioglitazone, exenatide, and metformin versus standard of care, that at the end of the follow-up 6 years, we had less steatosis based on the CAP score from FibroScan. So standard of care was about 69% with evidence of moderate to severe steatosis versus half of that, about 31% in the triple combination therapy group. So less NAFLD. And then when we looked at also liver stiffness, looking at fibrosis, we had less F3, F4 fibrosis in the combination group. That was 7% versus 26% in the conventional therapy group. So encouraging results. I think the message I would take from this is that if you're managing type 2 diabetes, that you need to start aggressive at the beginning, get diabetes under control, and down the line, this is going to help your fatty liver disease and hopefully also prevent progression to advanced fibrosis. So I'm happy to be part of this work. Obviously the study has some limitations because we couldn't do liver biopsies or more fancy MRIs. We didn't have baseline measurements, so maybe there was some imbalance between the 2 groups at baseline. But I'm happy that we're able to implement this at the end of follow-up in this important trial.
It strikes me that the scale of difference is such that while, for all the reasons you say, I'm not sure you'd want to bank on those exact numbers being right. When you talk about fundamentally a third of the population and half the patients do better in terms of NAFLD, and a sixth of patients and half the cases do better in terms of fibrosis, it's F3, F4. Those are huge numbers.
Yeah, the way I think about diabetes medicines, there are, the good ones for fatty liver and the bad ones. And if you think about the combination we use that has pioglitazone, which is known to reduce steatosis and improve NASH and potentially an impact on fibrosis in diabetics, and we had a GLP-1 agonist, and we have very promising data on NASH resolution with the semaglutide. Whereas, in the conventional therapy group, we're using really medicines that don't help fatty liver disease. So you have metformin, which is neutral. You have sulfonylureas that can make it worse. You have insulin that will make you also gain weight and can worsen fatty liver disease. So, although the difference is striking, I do believe that if you start early, you may be able to achieve these outcomes. And I think it's going to be even better when we have potentially lanifibranor and semaglutide, so even more effective PPAR agonists and GLP-1 agonists.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I didn't make myself clear, I think, which is that it may even be a bigger effect than what you showed in the study, because you don't know what you get from not knowing whether the study is balanced or not. But those are big enough numbers that it's clearly effective is large. I'm not going to use the word significant because people use that statistically, but there's a big effect here, even if, in fact, the details around the numbers aren't right. That makes complete sense. Louise, we're kind of in your neighborhood now, kind of, in some ways.
Yeah. No, I think they're amazing numbers and well done on the work. Whilst you may not have had baseline figures, in the real world, we don't get all of the baseline figures on these patients. So its interpretation in a real world way would be more significant because we know from your data and other data that it does work to reduce. And I really do think Novo Nordisk and semaglutide, or people using it, are now missing a trick. It's a brand new drug in some areas, like the UK have now licensed it. We should be doing non-invasive technologies like FibroScan and CAP on every patient because that's real world evidence. We can get it, we can measure outcomes, it can be a long-term effect. We know that things like positive reinforcement by losing liver fat helps maintain people's weight loss or diet change. So I think it's an amazing study for all of those other contexts.
Very exciting, I agree. And you were going to dive into something else?
Yeah, just briefly, we also had a paper published in Hepatology Communication in collaboration with Pfizer NASH team. This was looking at the NHANES database and trying to predict the prevalence of NAFLD and significant fibrosis in the United States general population. So the NHANES database is what we call the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. This is a CDC project. Every couple of years, they have a cycle where they sample a population that represents the United States population. And we're lucky that in the 2017-18 cycle, they actually did FibroScans on about 10,000 individuals. We used that data to estimate the prevalence of NAFLD and significant fibrosis. And there are, similar papers, but we really optimized the cutoffs here. We used the cutoffs from the EDOS paper. We looked at cutoffs that maximize sensitivity, specificity. We looked at the UDEN index that is a balanced cutoff for sensitivity and specificity to provide more range instead of just absolute numbers. But what we found was consistent with previous studies that relied on ultrasound ALT to estimate the prevalence of NAFLD. So in our paper, we found that NAFLD based on the CAP score, and we used a cutoff of 302 decibels per meter. The prevalence was at 25%, consistent with previous studies. But more importantly, we found evidence for F2, F4 fibrosis, so significant fibrosis, in 4.4% of the general population. So this is significant, and this is really the patient population that will likely develop cirrhosis and liver-related outcomes. And then we did a deeper dive in patients with type 2 diabetes, and we found NAFLD in 54%, and more importantly, 18% had significant fibrosis. So I think this confirms the previous data on the prevalence of NAFLD. I think we're adding some new data on the prevalence of significant fibrosis, and we're highlighting the disease burden in patients with type 2 diabetes. We're doing more work with the NHANES database. We are very happy that we have FibroScan measurements. We're looking at other scores, including the AGILE-4 score, for example, to estimate the burden of NAFLD cirrhosis. I'll be presenting some of these data at DDW. We have some data for EASL, also looking at the AGILE-3+ score in the NHANES database. So I think this is really good because, again, it's done in a systematic way, and we have direct measurements of liver fat and fibrosis as opposed to just relying on liver enzymes and some of the indices like FIB4 index.
Can I ask you, did you also look at the meta-analysis cutoffs for CAP? For the just that they use a 248, a 260, and a 283 or something, just off the top of my head, because that's the sort of people I tend to use the meta-analysis because I use people who just come in and want to know their liver health. But I see more diabetes in the lower levels, in the sort of the 260, 285 range rather than really high. And I just wondered, because it's a real-world population that the NHANES is looking at, whether or not you can pick up people with different disease profiles at lower ranges, because obviously the meta-analysis is all CAPs.
We actually looked at it, and if you use the 248 for CAP, you end up with about 50% with evidence of suspected NAFLD. So that's why we use different cutoffs, and I feel like 248 was probably set a little bit too low. I mean, it's a balance, and obviously when you tell someone you have fatty liver disease, some patients will not even care and do anything we tell them to do, but some other people will take it to heart and think that they have very significant liver disease, and maybe sometimes we're, over-calling it a disease. It's a risk factor, definitely, for developing liver disease down the line. So I think 248, you end up with a lot of people that are at suspected NAFLD. And I know that some of them will actually have significant disease, but I think we should probably be in the 280 range, if not 300. Again, it depends on what you're trying to do, but we wanted to kind of provide a balanced approach and provide more confidence when we call it NAFLD that it is true NAFLD. But if you're trying to have a good test with very high sensitivity and not miss anyone, you can definitely use lower cutoffs.
Those two papers together kind of feel a little bit like a pincer movement, in that one speaks to the scope of the issue and the other says there's a lot you can do today, right? Since one of the questions you hear is, well, what can I do now? And the answer, I think, we're seeing ACE and other organizations start to focus on the type 2 diabetic patient as the most obvious target. And what I take from what you've said is that don't even worry on one level about whether the patient actually is exhibiting NAFLD or NASH. You should treat them as if their liver matters anyway. And that's how you avoid problems in the years to come. Of course, this is what Louise taught me. I think I'm taught well, but I'm taught by the best, obviously, and taught well, but that would be my construct of what I hear you saying.
I think the message is that type 2 diabetes is just a different beast, and we really need to take this way more seriously if you have type 2 diabetes, because as you said, Roger, we can do a lot today in how we manage their diabetes to prevent these outcomes in the future. So I think we really need to keep pressuring the societies to implement screening for NAFLD, risk stratifying patients, and then managing type 2 diabetes in a different way that will be helpful for the liver.
As you know, we're putting together this pilot series for targeted endocrinologists. And episode 3 is, so what can you do now? And somehow strikes me that this paper belongs in that episode. Thank you for that. Louise, other thoughts?
Well, my other thought about when Naim was talking about using the 248 cutoff is that's not dissimilar to what I see when people walk in for lifestyle. But also using that 248 means they've got targets because we use each of the grades, but they do make it. They do feel better when they get to that level. But it's also about the cardiovascular risk, the hypertension, all of the other risks that we're going long term. So maybe those figures aren't too far out of what we're seeing in background populations. And that's the concern. By looking earlier, you detect that earlier. And I think that's obviously where I'm coming from now, because we shouldn't get into that level of the 305s, the pluses, the ones with the fibrosis, if we've gone downstream or upstream, isn't it? That to me is more what I see in the general public that come in and they're interested in their liver health, but their mental approach is different. Oh, so I've got a little bit of liver fat. We share it with the GP, we share anything. They're always taken that way, but it's like, oh, I've got a little bit of liver fat. What can I do now about it? There's a total different ability because they've not been diagnosed with the disease that they're focused on. They're just being told to tweak something. It's more of that self-management and tweak. And as you've said, for the weekend, I've just done 3 weeks of eating and drinking in Sydney, which is not what I would normally do. So I'll be doing my liver fat when I get home and I'll be tweaking slightly more. But I have that ability, and I know lots of people in the liver world who do that too. It's that ability now to be able to look non-invasively. You would test somebody's blood pressure for hypertension. You might give somebody an ECG. This should just be that sort of standard. Let's check it out and rule it out rather than wait to rule it in.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. The way I think about it, Louise, is let's rule it out when the intervention is lifestyle. When someone is obese, they have insulin resistance, we have nothing to lose. We can work with them to lose weight. That will add years to their lifespan, and there's really no downside to eating healthy and being more active. I think we need to think about rule-in and being more confident that there is significant disease when we think about pharmacologic treatment, especially with medicines that may have potential for side effects. So this is how I look at it. If my recommendation is going to be lifestyle, I'm going to be very aggressive and use the low cutoff. If I'm thinking about studying medicine, probably I'm going to do the FibroScan, follow it with another non-invasive test, make sure that I'm treating real disease, and then get them on pharmacologic treatment.
You know, it's funny you should mention that. I'm living with this right now, not liver disease, but I white coat my blood pressure readings. So I got a home machine. I'm not taking my pressure twice a day, and I am consistently prehypertensive. You know, I'm not anywhere near 140 over 90, but I'm not below 120 over 80 regularly either. And it's motivating me to drop a few pounds and change the weight because I really don't want to go on medication. And the ACEs and the ARBs are generally pretty benign drugs, but if I don't need to take a medication, why would I do that, right? So I think that's exactly the phenomenon you're talking about. The low cutoff will motivate better behavior. The high cutoff is what drives you to medicate or not. Makes sense.
Yeah, speaking of lifestyle, so I'm very excited to share that we've been working with Noom, the weight loss app. We actually are doing an investigator-initiated study. It's a single-center study done at Arizona Liver Health in Phoenix, where we actually enrolled 40 subjects with obesity and evidence of fatty liver disease on FibroScan. And they're going to get the Noom app, and we're going to follow them for a period of 6 months. And we'll see how much weight they lose at the end. This will be the primary endpoint. But then we're looking at multiple secondary endpoints, including reduction in liver fat on the CAP score, improvement in liver stiffness measurements, changes in ALT, AST, and then some investigational biomarkers that will look at hepatocyte apoptosis and liver fibrosis. So, you know, I love writing protocols. I like to do investigator-initiated studies. I like to kind of be in charge of a few things that we do locally because this is exciting. You feel like this is your baby. You worked on it with a sponsor. You enrolled the patients. We've seen some good results already, but we need to look at the full data set at the end. But it seems like, you know, when people commit to Noom, they actually lose weight, and we've seen remarkable reduction in liver fat in some patients. And I cannot share the results of this study. Hopefully by the end of this year, we should be done with data analysis. We're also getting more and more involved in the field of digital therapeutics. So these are, you know, apps that eventually will receive FDA approval, and they will need medical provider to prescribe to patients, and they rely on game theory and gaming to engage patients to lose weight. So we just launched a new study also with Better Therapeutics, and we're going to enroll 20 patients, and for this study they will receive a liver MRI to quantify liver fat on MRI PDFF, and will assess changes after the intervention. So I think this is, you know, we always talk about lifestyle interventions, diet and exercise. We always talk about pharmacologic treatment, but I see this as kind of a companion to pharmacologic treatments to improve the efficacy of lifestyle interventions. And I think we're going to hear more and more about these digital therapeutics and weight loss apps in the years to come.
So you made the comment that Noom relies on motivated patients. Do digital therapeutics rely on them to the same degree, or is it your belief that it will be easier to get sicker people? I mean, go back to where we started, right? You've got at the low end, you've got the marker that says you want to motivate people to do better. High end, you've got drugs. We would take a diet behavioral intervention like Noom, maybe all the way through that scale from 240 to 303 as an analogy. Where do the digital therapeutics kick in?
Digital therapeutics, they're relying heavily on cognitive behavioral therapy and educating the patients about the relationship with food and why we overeat and what are the drivers behind what we sometimes perceive as lack of will to lose weight, which is really way more complicated than the individual will to actually implement the lifestyle changes. I think they also rely heavily on plant-based recipes and providing the patients with easy to make plant-based foods. And I think also the involvement of this gaming and achieving different levels. I think at the end of the day, we will need to generate data similar to what we generate in pharma-sponsored trials. So we're starting with these proof of concept studies, but eventually it will be a biopsy, potentially a biopsy. We'll see, depending on the timing. I'm always saying that we need to get rid of biopsy. So I hope we don't get to biopsy trials with digital therapeutics, but it's going to be whatever the FDA will allow as a provable endpoint for clinical trial that we use in pharma trials that we have to achieve with these digital therapeutics before they get FDA approval. So a lot that we need to do, and we have a steep learning curve to see what works, what doesn't work. We have ways to measure patient engagement also, and we may end up at a point where we do some surveys and initial assessment before we prescribe a specific digital therapeutic if we have different options to select the most appropriate patient for the most appropriate app.
I'm kind of wowed, frankly. I'm envisioning, first of all, your idea that goes, we might do surveys to figure out which digital app goes to which patient is, I think, a rather exceptional level of being able to engineer digital apps to specific behaviors and then identify which behaviors they match up with, which is really cool. It takes me back to one of the things that's come up on this podcast a few times recently, which is, and Louise mentioned this, in fact, Naim, this is the thing Louise mentioned last week that you got so excited about. Can we use patient intake interviews to do AI assessments on who's likely to have fatty liver issues, right? Over time, before you get to pharmacology, with good AI and good digital tools, there's just an awful lot you can do. It's an exciting world.
It is, and I think, the other thing we need to get to is that, diet interventions and counseling should be personalized. This should be based on the genome, microbiome, exposome, family history. What we are doing is, everyone has an opinion about what diet is best, but really there's no one diet that works for everyone. And when I say that, it's not just your preference and what you like to eat, but it's really your microbiota, your genome, how you metabolize different things. And we're not there yet, but I was encouraged. This past week, I had 2 patients come to me with 23andMe and another company that does genome sequencing. And they show you very interesting data on the risk of hemochromatosis and alpha-1 antitrypsin. And these are cheap tests that, you can do for $200 now. And I think we're going to get to the same level with the microbiome. And it's going to be interesting to implement all of this with the patient quality of life questionnaires and their preference to really develop a personalized diet, lifestyle intervention, and potentially an app that works for them.
To me, it's a no-brainer. I think a lot of people use the digital technology anyway. My mother has pulmonary hypertension and was told by her hospital physician, use the digital apps that do your oxygen levels, things like that. They're not ideal. They're not clinically, they're not even medically approved, but they help doctors track and they help motivate patients and they keep them reassured. I think that's a real benefit. Is there potential in the future to say that most illnesses that are lifestyle we could prevent if you're given the app, if you're allowed to use these technologies? What we're seeing at the moment is the rise in these diseases. Are these individuals who don't really engage with the apps or don't want to see that data because it becomes frightening? There's that mix. Some people enjoy that type of monitoring. Some people get engaged. I enjoy watching my sleep score. I don't get a lot of that in Australia with you guys, but other people want to know every morsel they've eaten, where their energy, track their energy, do that. And I think it's where body shape doesn't matter so much when you're looking at that digital app. But some people feel embarrassed wearing the watches. They're difficult if you take them off your wrists and things like that. So I'm excited to see where it's going and how we can engage the groups that use it less to use it more without feeling that they're being tracked too much. So like Naim at the beginning, at the top of the episode, you have a couple of bad days, then you go back to a couple of good days.
Yeah, I think, Louise, as part of the answer to your question is going to wind up lying exactly where Naim was, which is behavioral health, which is, different people may be willing to deal with different levels of digital intervention. And if they trust the sanctity of their data, then a lot of this is set up by game theory and to figure out what it is that motivates people. So if we get the motivation right, eventually there'll be a broad enough menu that more people will be able to choose something that works for them. Never everybody. I don't think that's feasible. I think you're still going to have a lot of people who aren't going to touch it. But the more people we can help, right, the better. So, Naim, this is quite a bunch of stuff you brought us. Anything else you want to share so far? I think this is fantastic.
Well, no, thank you so much for having me. I think I've said enough for one episode. There's always so much happening in our world. And in addition to the papers and the trials, there's a lot that's happening in the educational sphere also. And we're trying to raise awareness. And this is something we should maybe discuss in one of the episodes and see what we can do to elevate it and bring it to more providers, especially mid-levels, MPs, physician assistants, or advanced practice practitioners. But there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of education that we need to do.
At multiple levels. One closing thought. When do you get to Barcelona?
Actually, I'm going for a whole week. So I leave April 30th and then I'll stay for a week. So I'm going to go to Granada for 2 days.
So first of all, you two will get to meet for the first time, right?
Oh, good. Okay. I did not know that you're coming, Louise. Okay, this is great news.
I couldn't miss this party.
Once you found out how many people were going to be there.
Yeah, well, let's go eat some good food.
There's some of that to eat. I think that's right. And then the second thing is this. I'm moderating a panel on exactly what you just talked about. Digital intervention, social media, and where that fits on the pathway to improved health. So I'm going to want to spend at least an hour with you. I will buy whatever we're eating or drinking.
Okay.
And to pick your brain a little bit because you're touching on all the right subjects, really. All of them. In a breathtaking 22 minutes. Very impressive.
No, happy to do that. And I'm very excited for this investigator initiative investigator-initiated studies, and I'm hoping that in the next couple of years we'll be doing multi-center studies that look at these digital therapeutics.
Couldn't agree more. So, Naim, thanks for joining us today. We will see you I say recently, but we'll see you again in 2 weeks now, 2.5 weeks?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, folks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Here is our interview with Donna Cryer.
And we're back. And in fact, not only are we back, but most of the band is back together. We can't be the Beatles because we don't have Jorn. We can't be the original band because we don't have Stephen, but we do have Donna with us, which is worth the price of admission. Hey, Donna, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Glad to be here.
And it's now 7 a.m. in Australia, so Louise is doing a lot better than she was 6:30 at least. So she's doing better than she was on the last call, which is...
Absolutely. I'm wide awake. I've had my caffeine now.
You are a warrior.
She's been getting all kinds of extra bonus points and stuff. So at any rate, we just thought it would be good this week to check in with some of our favorite people and see what y'all been up to for the last few weeks. We just got off the phone with Naim. I talked earlier to Mike Patel, who'd never been on the podcast before, but I figured Mike and I are two reasonably well-known liver advocates in North America that have never had liver disease, right? If you think about everybody else is a patient. We're not. So I thought that would be interesting, and in fact it was. And tomorrow I'm talking to Lars Johansson. That's going to be too crazy an hour for Louise, about what he's been up to since our episode last September.
I might be able to make that one. I will set my alarm because Lars is so entertaining.
So Donna, not to tee this up, but you said you actually had news for us.
I do. I am very excited to announce, and it is live on the NCQA website and soon on the GLI website and other places, a new white paper that friends who are well known to all of us, including Arun Sanyal and Ken Kuzi, including Primary Care and others, have issued this white paper. So for everybody who was wondering, are the quality measures being built in for NASH? And all I could do was smile previously. And so that's a great idea while we were working on this. And so with help from friends at Novo Nordisk, the National Committee for Quality Assurance convened several of us together, and we issued a paper that's now public. It's called A Rallying Cry, Improving Coordinated Care for People with Non-Alcoholic Steatohepatitis. I'm very excited to have this piece ahead of the meeting in Barcelona, where we'll also be discussing coordinated care and what does quality mean for NASH patients. You know, the guidelines process and the quality measure process are often obscure and opaque, but they are really important pieces to this puzzle of really having, at the end of the day, people with access to all of the elements to optimize NASH care that they need.
That's fantastic. That really is exciting. I mean, the guideline process has been moving apace, right?
It's a pace. That's what you can call it.
Well, we're starting to see some guidelines from people.
Yes, and I think the very exciting thing is that as we constructed the GLI NASH Council from the very earliest days, most people don't know, my first call was to my friend Nancy Brown, the CEO of the American Heart Association, to put this together, to send a representative. And my next calls were to the Endocrine Society and ACE. That strategy of enlarging the tent and ensuring that all of those NASH-adjacent physicians, whether they knew that the NASH was theirs or not, that they were at the table from the very beginning. We're seeing that in those guidelines in endocrinology and cardiology. AHA just had a big paper on NASH this week as well. And so I feel that the seeds that we planted at the very beginning of the convening of the GLI NASH Council are now blooming, which is appropriate because it's spring. So these wonderful things that are really important pillars to this therapeutic area and show its maturation are coming into place.
Fabulous. It's just what it needed, and it bringing that platform together. Fantastic. Congratulations to you and the team.
Yeah.
I was thinking that guidelines without quality measures aren't really guidelines at all, right?
Well, you need to have the guidelines first, because it's not really fair to be assessing physicians or practices or health systems on things when the medical societies or when the field and the specialists themselves have not defined what quality care looks like. NCQA is such a wonderful organization, and I was excited to do an episode of GLI Live with their CEO, Peggy O'Kane, to outline that there was this new option available to be able to have a white paper, even if it isn't a quality measure yet, but to have the NCQA process and imprimatur on a paper and on sort of a consensus document, even ahead of having AASLD guidelines updated in the way that we would like them and look forward to seeing them. So really grateful that NCQA was so flexible in creating this new pathway and platform to be able to have this discussion even while we're having the guidelines catch up. That wasn't really possible, that's really rather unprecedented unprecedented. So we're really excited that we were able to accomplish that.
I think the other benefit of this, as you said earlier, is it's ahead of the Barcelona conference. And the one part on the agenda of the Barcelona conference that is not there is the quality metrics. It's about the science, it's about the meeting, and it's bringing, as Sean and Jeff described in the Surfing NASH recently, it's bringing all the components together. But unless you have the guidelines and the outcomes, you can't put the framework in. So for me as a nurse, I can't put nursing guidelines in to care for the people and the patients unless we've got the quality that we're aiming for. So the one thing I would still say about the conference is there's no nursing element. There's no distribution of care discussion in that. And that may not be for this conference. That may be for further down the line because you've got to start at the beginning. Having these is absolutely vital. We've obviously got the RCN guidelines for the care of liver patients in the UK, which are one of the only ones. So these can be adapted now. These can be fitted round what physicians want as quality and what patients, more importantly, want as quality. How am I cared for? Who's going to do that care? What do I expect for them? All absolutely vital in developing that, not only in the US, but internationally, so that there is a standard that people can understand, people can get within their own care frameworks. So that's really good.
Absolutely. If people don't know what to ask for, they can't advocate for themselves. These are really important bellwether. And to have them, you're absolutely right. In the UK, in the US, tailored to different health systems. So that's a really additional important aspect of it as well.
Donna, you may have missed this last week, but we did Harrisonisms last week. Everybody, we had the Stephen Harrison drinking game played with black coffee. You would have loved it a half an hour ago. But everybody had to come up with their favorite thing, as Stephen says a lot. And I don't know about you, Louise, it's made me terribly self-conscious about what would happen if this happened to me. But if it did, one of the things I'm sure would show up is the phrase that people do what's inspected, not what's expected. And that goes back to this paper, right? Not only do patients not know what to ask for, but if people don't know how they're evaluated, then you go back to the other line about if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
Right.
Well, now we know where we're going. Between guidelines and the beginning of quality metrics, we know where we're going. So that's fantastically exciting.
So let's see. I like to talk in threes. My mother in particular believes in the power of three, and we are just post-Easter, so I'm very high on the trinity of things as magic. I also watched Spider-Man No Way Home, and they saying three is a magic number at the end of that. So three is a powerful thing. So I'll have three things to announce in this episode. So the NCQA white paper on NASH is one. The American Heart Association scientific statement about the connection of NASH to cardiovascular disease, the formality, understanding, knowing what that process is at the American Heart Association, to know what that takes to get it to that level is really exciting to have that. And the third thing is, the official launch of our Liver Health is Public Health campaign. And we've got a lot of questions about, well, what does that mean for NASH? Are you taking your attention away from NASH? And I just want to say, not at all. If anything, this gives us a broader, bigger platform in which to talk about NASH. Anything that affects 1 in 4 or 1 in 3 people is a public health issue, and it needs to be positioned as such. And I really think that this is the movement and the momentum that will allow NASH and hopefully, yes, all the other types of liver disease to come behind it, but a refocusing on liver health and all the things that you can do to prevent NASH, to prevent liver disease, that you can do to prevent or reverse course are so important to talk about from a public health standpoint, and to engage all of the tools and people and policymakers and policy levers that are available when you start talking about something as a public health initiative. And we need them all for NASH more than any other type of liver disease. I was asked the other day, if you were to start a global movement that would impact the most people and enhance people's, well-being the most, what would that be? Well, I'm like, I have started a global movement that is intent on impacting as many people as possible, and that is liver health as public health. If people pay attention to their liver health, because of the centrality of the liver, their cardiovascular health that, as AHA now, recognizes, their brain health, their overall health and well-being will be much the better. And surely the first disease that will be positively impacted by attention on liver health as a public health issue is NASH.
Yeah, I think that's right. Oh, by the way, just for kicks, a group in South Korea today dropped a refereed open access paper taking a look at the ability of NAFLD to predict response to COVID during the first half of 2020. An issue we haven't heard a lot about in a while, but it comes back to a whole other element of liver health, right?
Absolutely. One of the things that we've been talking about in many different places and platforms, but even in conversations with our friends at the National Institutes of Diabetes, Digestive and Kidney Diseases, NIDDK, within NIH, is that not only do we have more liver patients throughout COVID, whether it's because they've missed appointments and their disease has progressed, but COVID itself is causing liver patients. It's causing liver damage and kidney damage, and so we need to look at that. So the overall pool of people who are affected is only increasing in numerous ways. We see rises in alcohol disease, we see rises in cancer, we see rises in NASH, we see rises in pediatric NASH, and we see COVID-induced liver damage as well. And we don't want that to be ignored.
That all makes sense. I mean, right? Every bad behavior that the pandemic amplified all land in the liver.
Well, I think, every coping mechanism that so many of the coping mechanisms and choices that people felt compelled to make or were amplified during COVID. And it's interesting. There's sort of a spectrum. There were people who have never been more at peace, more exercising, more hiking, more outdoors, more Peloton, more whatever. They emerge, stronger and better. And then there's another segment of people, and all too often it's Black, brown, or poor people who had to stay at their jobs and couldn't take time off to get vaccinated. And for a host of other reasons, that there's this whole other segment at the other end of the spectrum whose health is far worse at this point in the pandemic. And so it's not just people were making bad choices, is that people had different coping mechanisms and access to different things to either make them well or to reinforce often their pre-existing conditions.
Yeah, or as you point out, just didn't have the support or tools they needed to be able to take care of themselves because of society who's asking so much of them and giving them so little back.
Right. Even during the course of this day, I had different capabilities to respond to my workload based on how well I was feeling. And so if you don't have a strong foundation in mental health, if you don't have just a strong foundation in health, and have energy and everything, then every choice is a hard choice. And the likelihood that you're going to make a so-called bad choice and choose sugar or a fatty food or binge TV shows instead of getting up is more likely to happen if you are not in the best mental state, or your underlying physiology doesn't give you a lot of energy and things. It's a cycle that can either be virtuous or non-virtuous.
It probably goes all the way to vicious, actually, not merely non-virtuous. It can, and yeah. I sell for a living, so I try to emphasize the positive. I don't sell quite as hard as you do, but I do sell for a living. But yeah, I think that's exactly right. And if you look at the rural northern United States and the pathologies of winter, or for example, Russia, I mean, now, a lot of alcohol, a lot of suicides, a lot of stuff because people just don't have the wherewithal in rural environments. Either if you have the personality or the personal strength, you can manage it. But if you don't, you're not going to get a lot of support anywhere.
Right. One of in my infrequent but increasing number of outings, I had the opportunity to attend the Association of Black Cardiologists Cardio Justice session, a day and a half, in which the now and once again, FDA Commissioner Rob Califf gave the keynote. And part of Dr. Califf's presentation was on the lower life expectancy that we have. And particularly, he honed in on the increasing disparities, both racial and ethnic disparities. So African American and Hispanic life expectancies having a much steeper downward trajectory, but also for those in rural America. And so as the Global Liver Institute thinks about our programs and partnerships, and we're always proud that the Association of Black Cardiologists is one of them, how can we meet the needs of communities better? And how can we define communities broadly enough to reach everybody who is affected, not just those who are already diagnosed and designated as liver patients and claim that identity, but how can we reach people sooner? And I think that will mean that our Liver Action Network members networks, which now stretch across 42 states and Canada, and as well as the partnerships that we have outside of the United States, will all need a different definition of who they partner with to advance liver health and to give liver information and to support people and families who are at risk for or experiencing liver disease. Louise, in your expanded screening and testing of people, how are people finding you? How are people getting to you? Is the sort of a non-traditional, broader outreach beyond the sort of pre-described walls of Liverdom helping to bring people to you?
I think it's one of those things. We're trying to sell the most unsexy organ that's highly stigmatized.
I'm working on that. Have you seen the pictures? I am working on that.
You're working on that.
You are killing it, woman. Totally killing it.
But I think it's one of those things, when you talk to people, and I'm sure you all find this, and you tell them about the liver, A, they don't know where it is, but B, they think they've got two and can probably put their hands on their kidneys. But actually, once they start to find out about it, they're really interested.
Right.
And it's like, wow, I didn't realise it did that, or I forgot it processes everything I eat and drink, and they engage. And I think it's how you sell the story. I think we've said with Stephen in the past, you can give information in a way, you judge different people. I get a little bit more time, so you talk to people in the way, and I very rarely ask somebody, oh, you made a change, I can see it in your liver. It's always the case of, tell me what you've done. What have you altered? And very, very rarely does what I see not correlate with what they tell me. So I don't ever talk in a follow-up scan about what they've done. The people who come to us are people who are generally more focused on their lifestyle, or have been told by friends of friends that they can now get a scan, or have been waiting a long time in the NHS and need a scan because they just don't get the follow-up. We only have 26% of the country have access to FibroScan. It's mainly through units. So this is a slow burner, but we are getting an awful lot of interest from sports clubs. We did one recently at Woking Football Club where we turned up and somebody just rocked up from hearing it on the radio, came in, high liver fat, coming back in the future to have a look. It's like, oh, my mate phoned me on the phone and said, oh, you're down there. So people are understanding when you speak to them that it's had an effect. But mostly it's because they've eaten and drunken more during COVID. And that target of, did your life change during COVID? Your liver health may be worse. But that whole thing that you were talking about, it is the window to your health. Liver health is public health, and it's not closing down NASH. It's the fact that you can detect a poor liver, and a poor liver tells you to look for something more. But a bad liver test doesn't. A good liver test doesn't. But actually engaging somebody. We were talking with Naim, this whole fact of engagement, giving them some feedback that can be done quite quickly. I've just had 3 weeks of probably eating a lot more quality food or poorer quality food than I would normally. I have the ability to track my liver health when I go back to see what's changed in 3 weeks, so that'll be interesting. But I also know a slightly better diet, and the one going back to your point earlier about the poorest in society being affected greatest, yes, because the fast food outlets were the best obtained during the pandemic. We even had a campaign which we supported afterwards to get businesses back up and so-called Eat Out to help out. It was like, oh my God.
Eating out isn't a bad thing if you're going to, a food that has, health, an array of options. But so many people live in, and I love this term, it's rather than food deserts, it's food swamps. So it's not that there's no food options, it's that the food options that have poured into those communities by intent are fast food choices, are low cost, but also low nutrient.
Absolutely. And I think we talk a lot about weight loss because we know weight loss works. So if we say 10% body weight, but we also know that doesn't work for most people. They can't keep it off and they put weight on. There was an awful lot about at EASL last year and ours about the quality of the diet, the microbiomes, the change the quality to affect your liver health quicker. And in fact, we've got a case history on the website where the person's tried for 5 years to diet, or not so much diet, do the exercise to try and remove the liver fat. It wasn't until COVID they dropped the sugar out of their diet every day, and they lost 1 kilo, reversed the liver fat from a level of 292 to down into the 230s in 5 weeks. So their phenotype was sugar.
Mm-hmm. I resemble that remark. I understand that.
But for people who live with obesity, that's important.
It does. It takes a level of focus to be able to focus that's not given to maybe commuting or getting the kids to school or 1,000 other things to do with life and keeping everything up and running, to make the decision to focus on yourself as its own work stream, if you will. Something that I had to learn the hard way at having multiple chronic diseases. It's a hard thing, but only when recognized recognizing that it deserves its own portion of your brain and of your energy and your attention and your focus to track or do or to change or to get ahead of prepare meals ahead of time or substitute instead of just taking your sugar away. Well, what do you substitute for that habit? It takes more than people who just say, well, lose some weight. Think about, when they're, making that too casual assignment, that it really is a reorganization of your measure of your life and your habits, and it needs sustained energy and attention to do that. And that's a very high level skill, frankly.
It's also that ability to track it quicker. Mm-hmm. So for people who live with obesity, if you can change your liver health losing 1 kilo, you don't feel like you're on that treadmill and that real difficult thing, I've still got 9 kilos to lose. Actually, you've improved your liver health, which will improve other health on that change. If you continue that change, your weight drops consistently is what I've seen, because they've made that one change that's benefited them. They keep it going. They've made a positive lifestyle change that quite quickly has given a result for some. That means I don't need to change too much more. I will take that and see where it takes me. And consistently, this person now tracks within the normal range. They still have their sugar, but it's more at the weekend. That's their treats. Weekends are great for treats.
So let me try to take the last conversation Louise and I had and this one and see if we can weave them together a little bit. That was with Naim, who was talking actually about the work that he's doing on behavior. So Arizona Liver Health is doing a project with Noom. Okay. And he's increasingly doing work with digital kind of pharmaceutical equivalent FDA-approved digital devices. So what struck me is that we're going to have much better behavioral tools for people who can afford to use them and use them. And we were actually talking about tying that into some degree to CAP scores, right, and liver stiffness, where there's a liver stiffness threshold above which people really better take care of themselves so they don't get to the threshold at which they need drugs. And Louise and I actually kind of put a number on where the endpoints were on a FibroScan. So all that's doable. The question becomes, to the degree that it requires tech literacy.
Oh, you're going to make me make a fourth announcement, and that breaks my little beautiful, trinity of things.
I spend my life trying to mess people up in constructive ways. So what's your fourth announcement? Go ahead.
You're absolutely right. So, on this program, digital health is really important to me. And I spent a lot of time earlier in my career and was at one point a GAO appointee to the HIT policy committee and launched the consumer engagement in health information technology campaign for the U.S. government. And so we have, and I'm actually, in the vicinity of this program, not knowing exactly when this will air, I will be speaking at for the University of California Health System on their use of data and for the public good. And so this is something that's really, really important to me. And as much as my heart is in hepatology, I still love to be connected to this tech space, the digital health space, the AI space. I think it's important to the future of health and all of us. And so it will be democratized. Certainly the number of devices, I've seen the price points of them go down. I think it will be just what's called health. But you're right. Sometimes it's not intuitive. And so one of the outcomes or outputs of our Advanced Advocacy Academy this fall will be training community digital ambassadors, which we have, community health workers, but some of our graduates and who are already really fantastic peer mentors to be able to add to the things that they're able to work on with other patients and with community members is being able to, how do you sign into your patient portal? How do you set up, an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something and use that? How do you connect them to each other? As we've talked to innovation hubs around the country, including at Sibley Hospital, which is part of Johns Hopkins Medicine, where I'm on the board, the effectiveness, which, makes sense, of having someone who can sit down with you and help you in a hands-on kind of way, I think is really important for people being able to access all that's available to them digitally. So we're really excited for that.
Yeah, so we're in violent agreement on that, Lenny. You just said something that really struck me funny, which is that as much as your heart is with liver, it's also with digital health. Let me suggest that liver needs digital health more than just about any other organ in the body does. Seriously. Yes. I mean, here's the deal. You want to treat diabetes? Measure your glycohemoglobin. Lipids, LDLs, and ratios. Blood pressure, easy peasy. There is no one metric that defines the liver, and the complexity complexity of the liver is such that even when we talk about doing our simplest liquid blood test, once you get past AST, ALT, they are all computed measures of multiple different draws. The liver is the disease that is incapable so far of being expressed in a single target number that everybody knows how to shoot for. Therefore, digital AI devices, all that, will wind up being the only pathway we're going to find to get to a place where people know the target they're supposed to be shooting at.
I agree. And I, would love the future when we have sort of a liver health score, even more sophisticated than FIB4, some of the other things that we're starting to use, that people can calculate and really understand the movement. We'll get there. And that's why I, in my spare time, continue to accept these speaking engagements in the HIT space or some of the other spaces where I'm definitely the only speaker using hepatology use cases. And it's my way of building bridges to these other parts of the healthcare ecosystem to bring them in to the benefit of liver patients and the liver field. I think that's one of the advantages of GLI, of being connected to so many different parts of the healthcare ecosystem, so that when we're thinking through both the needs of people, but also the solutions that we can apply, they're much more multifaceted, not only multi-stakeholder, but multi-disciplined, whether it's drawing from medicine or engineering or design or business or law. Can't leave my legal folks out, but it's really exciting for me to bring anything from the innovation stage into the liver field.
That's absolutely vitally important. We are only as good as our ability to use the technology. And what we've seen through COVID, and I've watched it with my parents, is to be able to use a phone as a silver surfer. There's a lot of really good silver surfers out there, but a lot of liver disease sits in that older age bracket, encephalopathy. And you can get some good apps for encephalopathy assessments. Now, they should be all taught around the families to be able to know whether your loved one is deteriorating or changing. There's an awful lot of tracking we can do for liver health that keeps people out of hospital. But if you don't know how to use it, or you have another disability, my mother has macular degeneration, so it's very difficult for her to use a phone. So then I've got to teach my 85-year-old father how to download her COVID app. It's really, really difficult in an older generation who've been isolated and stuff to get used to this technology. So it does have to be relatively simple. Although it's highly complicated, at source, it needs to be, I use a red, amber, green scale because people understand it. So it's got to be interpretable. It's got to be easily accessible. And having digital teachers to help people do it as a resource is absolutely vital. It's something we forget sometime in healthcare. We give instruction, we send people away, and then we wonder why.
Then they're non-compliant.
It's not that they're not compliant. They just don't necessarily have the comfort in saying, I can't use that. I cannot do that. I don't have the skill set. And we really have to take that on board because we're scientists. I think it was Naim last week who used the phrase IYI, intelligent yet idiot. Because we can overly concentrate on the science, and liver physicians can be really, and academic liver physicians, the basic science is not basic science at all. It shouldn't be called basic science.
And yes, it's the most complex science that you could possibly have.
Absolutely, but we call it basic. Why? Because we want to intellectualize it even more.
Because it's the platform for everything else. Unfortunately, you have to go through that to get to wherever you're going.
I remember sitting in one for the first time going, I'll do this so I can learn something. It was like, whoa, I'm way in the wrong session here. But it was really funny. But it takes me back to this, when Naim said the intelligent yet idiot, it was such a great phrase because we need to rein it back. We can make it more simple and get more in buy-in than... So what you're doing there is absolutely fantastic because it's often a step that's forgotten.
I used to have a boss who was a physician, but we were in a non-overtly medical environment. And I told him, I'm like, he's so far ahead, he's behind, is what I was always thinking. And I'd have to go behind him to our team and explain. I'm like, what did he say to you? I'm like, okay, stop crying. Like, this is what he meant. This is what he said. This is what it meant. This is what you should do, and explain behind it. It was just, he was so brilliant that it just didn't translate. And it was, very hard for people, particularly those members of the team who didn't have a scientific background, to understand then what he wanted done. And so I think that that's important. Someone asked me the other day, if I have, both my parents are school teachers, did I ever consider going into teaching? And I said to them, I did. I am. I think of, the essential function of what I do. The Global Liver Institute is teaching people to prioritize the liver, teaching 1,000 different things that they didn't, know or think about before or think about in the same way.
Makes sense. So not surprisingly, I asked you for half an hour. We're 40 minutes in and we could probably go another 2 hours. So Donna, thank you so much. Anything else in closing? I mean, that's been a power-packed 40 minutes.
No. Glad you called. Glad I had so many things to announce. You knew somehow I needed to share that with the world. So thank you, Roger, for calling.
We've been feeling each other for a long time. That was just one more example of it. Thanks, Donna. Louise, enjoy your day.
Fantastic. Enjoy.
Donna, we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Have a lovely time.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye now.
And now for the Season 3, Episode 21 Business Report.
To our Ukrainian friends and colleagues, Slava Ukraini, Heroyam Slava. Glory to the Ukraine, glory to the heroes. I hope you enjoyed these interviews half as much as Louise and I did, so let's just recognize Ukraine quickly and get to the announcements.
There will be another interview episode soon.
As I mentioned to you yesterday on your special episode, the recordings of Mike Patel and Lars Johansson were unusable for two different reasons. Mike's never came through Riverside FM due to a labeling issue, and Lars recorded from his home where the upload speed was such that I could not really follow the conversation thread. Both these gents have a lot to say, so I'm starting to plan an episode for interviews in May, probably May 9th, with the two of them and two other of our friends. If there are any past surfers in particular you wish to hear from, please send email to me or post a note on LinkedIn. The discussion group is best, followed by the Surfing Nash page or my personal page to tell us who and why. We'll be sending invitations within the week, and we'll share a date for that episode next week.
We're coming into event coverage season.
For NASH Tsunami, event coverage starts next week as we preview the 5th Global NASH Congress. May will include that Congress itself and a preview episode for International NASH Day, while June will include International NASH Day itself, as well as preview, daily podcast, and wrap-ups, all from the EASL meeting in the second half of the month. Somewhere in there, we'll fit the interview episode I just mentioned and one or two other really exciting topics. Listen here for more programming news next week.
This audience keeps growing.
Our streak of weeks with over 1,000 downloads is at 7 in a row. 2 data points I like even better than that. 1, we're over 5,000 downloads for a 4-week arc for the first time since shortly after NASH-TAG. And 2, these numbers reflect regular weekly episodes without boosting from conferences or major news stories, which tend to pump up our listenership. Keep listening, keep telling your friends. Things are really going well and promise to get even better going forward.
Recent episodes have done very well, and The Vault had a busy week.
Part of the reason for the download growth is that recent episodes have performed quite strongly. We've done close to 90 regular weekly episodes now in 2 years, not counting conferences or major news stories, and 4 of the 8 most downloaded in their first 28 days have posted in the last 2 months. E9 on liver nursing, E11 on nail on IT, E14 on balloon hepatocytes, and E16 on data modeling. E15, the CLDF wrap-up, is a special episode. It's done better than any of those. So if you haven't caught those episodes again, E9, 11, 14, 15, 16, if you haven't caught them yet, they're each very different. None discuss specific drugs in development, but each covers a major development in Nashville, or should I start calling it NAFLD, just for a change. Of interest in The Vault, our record-setting conversation, Season 2, E46-2, where Stephen and Jorn summarized Lars Johansson's and Scott Friedman's talks from Paris NASH, picked up a dozen downloads this week for the first time since the beginning of February. People also reached back to listen to S3-E21.4, a conversation on the factors driving the focus on a multidisciplinary approach to NAFLD. S2-E32, that was another interview episode coming right in front of EASL with incoming President Thomas Berg, Donna Cryer, and our friend former GenFit Diagnostics head Neil Hosmain discussing what they anticipated from the EASL meeting. We've even gotten uptake on our second and third episodes from April 2020 with Yasmin Rosnahimi discussing how investors should look at NASH and Peter Traver discussing some key decisions for senior execs. Now, those are about 2 years old, but for whatever reason, they found a small resurgence this week. And with that, we're done. I want to thank our team, Magic Mike, who's had more work to do than usual, Eric, Steve, and Murph the Magnificent, who has been juggling holiday mom and podcast support for the last week. I want to thank you, our listeners, even more this week, given your increasing interest. However, my big shout this week is to my co-host, Louise Campbell, who woke herself up at some ungodly hours in Sydney, because she's not only co-host, but also fangirl who didn't want to miss an episode. One thing that makes working on this podcast with these people so much fun, for me, is that we're all fanboys and fangirls. We all have fun, we all believe. This week, Louise really went above and beyond. So with that, I'm off. Enjoy these conversations. If you haven't caught E20 with Jorn, I highly recommend catching that one as well. And stay safe, surf on. I look forward to seeing you next week again on the podcast. Bye-bye now.
Have any questions for the surfers? You can send them to surfingnash.com and we will answer on the podcast or the website.